Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
Everybody needs a little time away, I heard her say, from each other. Even lovers need a holiday. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. I am your host, Eric Hellberg. And you know, we're living a month in a day, man. We're like Einstein over here. We have no special talents, guys. We're just passionately curious about all things pertaining to men. How in the hell did we get here, and where is it that we want to go? Man, I started off with that Chicago Classic, and people are kind of feeling a little downtrodden, maybe a little specificity of romance in the air. It conjures up all those things, and maybe I am talking about that. But maybe I'm also talking about the Democratic Party starting to say goodbye to Hello Joe. Hello Joe was here, but now they're starting to say, Hello Joe, it's time to go. Even lovers need a holiday, Joe. I don't know if they're looking for your replacement, but something is afoot. You are way down in the polls, Mr. President. And never has a sitting president ever come back and won victory when 2/3 of the voting populace via all the polls, including now Fareed Zakaria on CNN, your boy, they've turned on you, Joe. And they've turned on you because they know you've turned on us. 2/3 of all voters, including Democrats, do not support Joe. He's behind 6 or 7 basis points in the polls in the battleground states that cemented the victory for him in the 2020 election. So the Dems are either going to even get more creative than ever before and come up with a new trick by which to trump the old trick by which they tricked old Trump and all of us before, or they are going to bring someone out of the closet. I didn't say a gay candidate. I know that's a Democrat. They're coming out. Someone is going to come out and maybe take his place because this is an impossibility. Well, we shall see. We shall see. The election's in November. I mean, hell, maybe Uncle Joe could just simply cancel the presidential election like our good friend Voldemort can't even say it, Zelensky did in Ukraine, because he said, we're at war. Why do we need elections? Well, damn it. Joe could say it too, couldn't he? We're the backbone of NATO. We're the backbone of their material and financial support in Ukraine. So by proxy, really directly, America's at war. Aren't we also supporting Israel? Although we know that Joe can't ride a bike, but for some reason he's backpedaling on that support. And I may talk about that tomorrow. Joe's real stance when it comes to the Jews in Israel. I may talk about that tomorrow, but put that feather in your cap. So, he just pulled us out of Afghanistan. Yes, we know that was a little bit of time back, but throughout his presidency, we've been at war. We're currently at war. We're engaged in conflicts. He doesn't have a chance to win. Shit, man. You want to talk about a civil war? Maybe President Biden has an inclination to act just like the guy he put into the presidency in Ukraine and maybe cancel our elections. I don't think so. I can't even imagine the bloodletting, the strife that could occur with that. But follow me here. If you listen to some of my past episodes recently, we talked about Russia and Ukraine. And we talked about the wild democratic involvement within that globalist playground. Leading right up to Barry. Of course, Barry was still in synergy with Hillary. And then the only fly in that ointment was President Trump. They started surveilling him before he ever took office. When his campaign started getting traction, they still thought they had it in the bag. And up until when Hillary lost, they still thought they had it. They just couldn't circumvent the true desire of the American people, nor had they put the mechanisms in place to manipulate the vote, simply because they did not think they had to. And so he runs up. He ends up winning, being President Trump. I've already talked about it, how really one of his most irreplaceable guys, especially if he was going to take the job of keeping America safe seriously, was immediately put into prison, just about without due process. And that sent a message to Trump. Focus on some other things, or key members, or people that you will find indispensable, and or people who can simply help you, because yes, you've done well in this area, but this swamp that he came to drain, it is so infested with gators, snakes, fetid water, stinking people, generalized rot, and people that have been there a long time. In fact, many of Barry's people. So there was only so much he could do and still somewhat hope. I made promises to the American people. I have an agenda. I see all this before me. Where do I even begin? And if you get all the legs of your table kicked out from under you, how do you stand? So he plodded forward. But they put this man under so much duress with so much bullshit stuff and constantly going and this and that. And of course, the whole impeachment thing never even came up until he was on the phone with Zelensky, our boy in Ukraine. And instead of addressing the aid, which he was thinking, why would I need to be talking about aid and munitions? Ukraine's not at war. What do they need all this shit for? Well, behind the scenes, we had already been prepping them for war against Russia and having everything in place where Russia would be so coward at their back door, they wouldn't even think to act. Well, Trump kind of bypassed that. And then ultimately Putin had to bypass it because he was now in a very precarious situation. This never would have happened under Trump. So he has to make the phone call because Ukrainians are burning Russians in the Donbass. Oh yeah. That same place where they had just recently in this last week taken 12 new hamlets or towns in Kharkiv. Oh yeah, Ukrainians were murdering Russians. So President Trump's like, what the hell's going on in the Donbass? Before I provide this formality of this aid, which I know nothing about. And guess what? That aid and all these other superlatives were being passed along even during the Trump administration, because when the deep state, the defense intelligence base that President Eisenhower, upon his exit, basically, if you listen to that speech, It was called something different then. We have now relegated it to the name Defense Industrial Base, just simply because we're acknowledging that it needs to be built back up again. America is weak, and we make money by building up the Defense Industrial Base. But President Eisenhower, when he left, almost resignedly said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." That's really ironic. Here was the supreme Allied commander in World War II. He worked with everyone. Rides that into the presidency, became somewhat dismayed, and as he leaves, he urges the people of America to be very careful, that these people are dangerous, meaning, I presided over all of that, but it has gotten out of hand. And now there are shadowy forces at play that we no longer, and even I, have no control over. Now imagine this, since we're talking about a particular part of the world. Did you know that good old Ike, Dwight D. Eisenhower, said, "No greater debt is owed to any leader in the world than to Marshal Zhukov"? Now, who was Marshal Zhukov of Russia? Well, you hear the term field marshal thrown out there. Imagine a 4-star general. This was the man solely responsible for having the Red Army defeat the Nazi scum. He then went on under the USSR to control the Soviet part of Germany. He then, I can't remember his exact title, kind of like Secretary of State for us, then went on to represent Russia all the way through the 50s. He got started in warfare well before World War II, but not long after World War I. He was an old-timer. He was a humble man. He was a sagacious man. Eisenhower went on to say about this Russian field marshal that the greatest debt and honor should be bestowed upon him in and above any other leader in the world, and said that no other man could have done to Hitler what Zhukov did. That changes the narrative a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, think about the Zhukov fighter. He won the Order of Lenin. That'll be meaningless to most people because they don't understand its significance. But for some reason, Eisenhower felt merit with this man. So here we are in this same area of the world. For some reason, we just can't seem to get out of it. All of these presidents have been involved there, just unbeknownst to us. And so we fast forward, we move through Trump's presidency. Despite all the obstacles, he is still somehow toiling out some good for the American people. And out of nowhere, from a Fauci black boxed funding program disseminated to him, our highest paid government official, almost like a tenured professor who cannot go away, Barry Obama bequeathed some funds to Anthony Fauci. Well, he knows that he cannot do these gain-of-function operations. He knows that he cannot do that on American soil. There is some limited activity, but to really go full bore, he needs to have partners in other parts of the world, and he picked Wuhan as one of them. So all of a sudden, we have a leak, whether it was by design, whether it was by accident. We know it kicked off in 19. So then we go all the way through the lockdowns take effect in 2020. the world comes to a screeching halt. Despite all that, and with a re-election bid coming up, Trump is of the people. He stayed out with the people. Leading up to that presidential election, all we knew about Biden was just his name. He was nowhere. He got out very seldom. And then, he couldn't figure out, do I wear the mask here, not wear the mask here? What do I do with the mask? Put the mask over here behind my head. This mask is here. We now know it never needed to be there, and I am going to talk about that in the very next episode. But for some reason, they had tried to get rid of Trump before he got in. They started deliberately maneuvering key people away from him once he did get in. They kept him somewhat mired, and I guarantee you there was a lot more going on behind the scenes to keep him from being ineffective, but they also saw the handwriting on the wall. Despite all that activity, he still was. And they knew that he was on the road to a resounding 2020 victory. Nothing they had tried could alleviate that. And then COVID sprang up. And despite Joe Biden not appearing anywhere, he ends up getting more votes. And I can guarantee you COVID was an attempt during those lockdowns to make voting prohibitively difficult, to make the mail-in ballot much more permissible. In fact, the de facto way to vote, because it is much harder to tally, correlate, and there are so many illegal and irregular activities that can go on with it. And ultimately, that's what led to Joe Biden becoming the most vote-getting elected official in the history of the world with 81 million votes. A guy who can't walk, a guy who can't talk, a guy who cannot be coherent for very long, a guy who was never even engaged with the people, but yet he beat an extremely popular president who in 2020 garnered approximately 72 million votes. And that was 10 million votes more than Barry Obama got with all the luster of his second term, engagement, and excitement. Trump was over the top. They just knew what they had to get, and that's when all the news media broke down. Everything went silent once things were looking good for Trump at a certain point. And if you were watching that election, we were like, broadcasting stopped. They had all these abnormalities. By about 3 a.m, everything had changed. It had changed out of nowhere. So now what I'm getting at is they threw everything but the kitchen sink at President Trump, and they were not able to stop him. Was somehow COVID involved with it as well? Let's explore this tomorrow. So until next time on the Comfortable with Chaos podcast, I bid you bon voyage, my burgeoning flock.
Until next time, like and subscribe to the Comfortable in Chaos podcast.